The choir will also be here for our traditional holiday concert for arts and medicine, and that is December 5th. So join us then. We usually have a pretty good turnout for them, and they are amazing. The call for submissions for the 2017 edition of The Human Touch are now open, so please consider submitting your poetry, your prose, your visual art, and as of last year, we have added audio as well as video. So if you are a musician or you are a filmmaker, we would love to see your work, and please share this with your friends and colleagues. This edition will be dedicated to Dr. Henry Clayman, of course, who was the founder of The Human Touch. And am I about done here? Let me see. Do I have anything else? Maybe one more thing. Oh, well, the Rockley Music Sale. That's why I forgot, because this place will be floor to ceiling with pianos and piano tuners as of, I think, beginning tomorrow. The Rockley Family Foundation brings instruments here. Probably some of you know this. Every year you can make an appointment and see amazing instruments that you can buy, and you actually get a tax deduction. So if you are in the market for a piano or even a banjo, I know, this is the place to be. And this starts this week, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So let us know. So it is always a pleasure to introduce one of our arts and medicine veterans. And I look forward to this every year, and I know most of you do as well, because Howie Movshovitz, Dr. Howie Movshovitz, who is on the faculty at our downtown campus in the College of Arts and Media, who is the director of the Denver Silent Film Festival, who is the film critic for KUNC and a contributor to NPR, always brings us something that is wondrous. It's either a film that most of us have never heard about, or it's something that is incredibly artistically complex and beautiful. And today he does what he does best, which he brings us something that most of us probably have never seen, but also it's not just, I think, a cinematic artifact. It's also a cultural and historical artifact, and I think that is going to deepen our experience of it. So today is The Land Beyond the Sunset. Howie calls this a curious movie, and with that, please welcome Howie Movshovitz.
So with free food, the audience has tripled, and I think that if there were free beer, we could pack the place. Yeah. I want to say one thing before I start. I got into doing these talks because of Henry Clayman. And this is the first time I've done one when he hasn't been here, which is a sadness for me. And you all worked with him and knew him better, but I miss that guy. So The Land Beyond the Sunset is a film from 1912, produced by the Edison Studio. And this is in the last days of Edison. His studio didn't really survive 1913 because with a number of other companies, they were greedy and short-sighted. Probably the greedy didn't put them out of business, but the short-sighted did. But in their last few years, what the Edison Studio did, and Thomas Edison had nothing to do with making this film, but it was made at the Edison Studio in the Bronx. They worked with a number of social welfare organizations and made films that were, in a certain way, commercials. But, we could maybe more kindly call them informational films. And this was made with the Fresh Air Fund, a charity which still exists, still takes poor kids from New York City and takes them out into the country on the long-held American belief that if you are taken out of the city and put in the country, your life will get better. Who knows? But anyway, they made this film, and its director is not someone of particular note. I think he made about 70 films, but that was not uncommon in the early days of film. Most of them very short, many of them made in a day. The Edison studio was making films like this every single day during the week. This one is a little more complex than some. It's a lot better than any of the others that we know of. But it's written by a woman named, and she's credited, Dorothy G. Shore. And there's no indication I can find that she wrote anything else. She may have written other films for Edison. She may simply have worked for the Fresh Air Fund. Don't know. Again, the director did not make any films of particular note. Most of the cast has one credit to their name, being this film. A few people have a few more credits, and the minister the minister and the head of the Fresh Air Fund both had a significant number of credits, even into the sound period, but in very, very small parts. So this is a film made by people who, whatever their talents, those talents did not get much recognized. And this film herself, it's hauntingly beautiful, I think, and lyrical in a way that certainly films from the Edison studio were not. And even D.W. Griffith, whose career was really cooking by 1912, even D.W. Griffith rarely achieved this level of lyricism. Occasionally he did. Anyway, so I thought it'd be interesting to look at. And if we have time, and if you feel like, it's 13 minutes long. We could look at it again, shot by shot, and maybe comment on it that way. Yes, right. Credited to Roger Ebert. Yes, who used to do this with a feature every year in the World Affairs Conference on the Boulder campus. So, never know where to look. No, Land Beyond the Sunset. If you go up to it just at its left, no, just go down to the title and over to the left and an arrow will show up. Left. A little farther. Go to the, there you are. No, it's a curious DVD too.
Somewhere the sun is shining, somewhere the sunbirds dwell. Hush then thy sad repining, God lives and all is well. Somewhere, beautiful island somewhere, and noble true, where we live and know. Beautiful island somewhere thy day is longer, somewhere thy task is done, somewhere the heart is stronger, somewhere the battle won, somewhere fertile isle of somewhere, land of our true, where we live on you. Beautiful land of somewhere. There is a happy land far, far away, where saints in glory stand, bright, bright as day. Oh, how they sweetly sing, worthy is our Savior King. Lord, let his praises ring, praise, praise for aye. Right in that happy land beams every eye, kept by our Father's hand, God cannot lie. Oh, then to glory run, be our crown and kingdom won, and bright above the sun, reign, reign for aye. The sun's smiling beauty, for mountain and river, the leaves fading wither, how dear to my sight. The lily and bluebell, so gracefully drooping, the hedge rose and woodbine, how fragrant and bright. It is from the road, from tomorrow retreating, the heart that is beating with purest delight. Birds are we, so are we, and we live as a body. When we do, study do, learning daily something new. Merrily, 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 singing merrily, merrily, merrily. Follow me, singing merrily. Hush then thy sad repining, God lives and all is well. Somewhere, beautiful isle of somewhere, life of my true, I will live on you. Beautiful isle of somewhere. Sweet and low, sweet and low, wind of the western sea. Blow, blow, breathe and blow, wind of the western sea. Over the rolling waters go, come from the dying wood and go. Go here, my candle lit, while my little one, while my pretty one sleeps. Sleep, my little one, sleep, my pretty one,
So there are two shots that particularly interest me in this film. Actually, there are more than that. One is the very first shot, which is the newsboy against a black background with no context whatsoever, just completely isolated from any kind of environment. And it's kind of stark, and I think it's sort of touching, and you don't really know what to do with it. And then the last shot, of course, which is held very long. And aside from it being, I think, unusually beautiful, the length, the duration of the shot brings to it an ambiguity that you rarely see in film, period, and certainly this early. And I think, the film has been, I think people find the film very arresting. And it's something that people who've seen it talk about a lot because, in a way, no one quite knows what to do with it. Comment, if you want, we can look at it again, but anybody want to make any comments or observations or whatever?
I'll kick us off. I found the ambiguity of the ending arresting as well, primarily because of, the reason the film was made. And I kept thinking, okay, this was made by the Fresh Air Fund. We know that it's part, educational, it's part an opportunity to, brand themselves and talk about what they do and how well, and, all the good they're doing. And yet this leaves us without that kind of message that we expect from that kind, those kinds of film. And I thought also complicating the end was that lullaby.
That's added later.
It is added later. Okay.
Yes.
But it really does, again, I think, deepen the ambiguity because we don't know if it is a song of comfort or if it is something else.
I think it's well chosen. But the accompaniment was added to this in about 2006, I think, 2006, 2008. because at the time the only accompaniment would have been whatever a musician in the room felt like playing. And that musician may not have seen the film before even, or those musicians. That's entirely possible. As an ad for the Fresh Air Fund, it really is curious. Because for one thing, it indicates rather clearly that the Fresh Air Fund does not keep a good eye on the kids. And it's one of the things, everybody writing about this film says, well, who's watching the children? And the other thing is, of course, we'll let that go to poetic license of some kind. But what is the ending about? The first time I saw it, it was introduced as being the first film to record a suicide, which I'm not sure I buy that, but that's how the person introducing it saw it.
I thought like you talked about the opening scene without a backdrop was interesting, but also when they did put him in context, that they shot it from a different angle. Yes.
And there's the Bronx in 1912, which is fabulous all on its own. That's what, right? It was just shot on the street. But yeah, they changed the angle.
And then somewhere the sun is shining could be my new mantra given the results of our election.
We're going to need a lot of new mantras. Any other comments? Yeah.
Just thinking some more about that ending and about the Fresh Air Fund. And I'm wondering if they're trying to say these children will be lost if we don't do more for them. And because otherwise it is so strange to see the little guy drifting off like that.
Oh.
I mean, I think today we expect that some other big boat will come along and save him or something,
Right, there's just that boat in Long Island Sound. And there it is. Yeah. Oh yeah. Right. No empowerment. No control. Just drift. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the commentary might be that dropping to a poor, underprivileged neighborhood and just doing like a picnic actually causes more harm than a sustained help, with their whole situation? It might do more harm than good.
I think that would be a 2016 reading. I'm certain that the filmmakers had no such notion. But but that doesn't mean the film doesn't suggest what it suggests. Yeah, and what does happen with this child? Does he just drift off because it's preferable to what he would otherwise go back to? Right, all those other kids are taken back, and he goes off into some kind of not exactly a dream world. The shots that lead up to the kid getting in the boat show Long Island Sound at low tide. And so there's a lot, right? It's not an idealized beach. It's a low tide beach with a lot of seaweed and junk and stuff. So it's not pretty exactly. It's kind of a genuine low tide beach. And so, the implications, are, I think, very confusing.
I had a little different take on it in the continued shot of the sailboat out on the horizon. I still left with he was either going to land or come across people in the sailboat, and that life potentially was going to be better than what he was living. Now that might be my way of trying to be healthy after the election. I don't know.
Well, that's the advantage of an ambiguous ending, that it leaves that space for our own reactions and responses.
But it does reinforce, if we're going to take that point of view of rescue, that the Fresh Air Fund rescues him originally, and he is still in need of rescue. And I think that kind of connects to, this point that, because it's so hard to figure out what they're getting from this, and unless they're trying to, again, send this message that this child
will need to be rescued in some way. And again, don't we all?
And
Please.
for us, the notion that he gets sent back to grandma is quite devastating, actually. You know, there's a film, and it's not available right now. It's the last film made by the great Italian neorealist Vittorio De Sica, with his longtime screenwriter Cesare Zavattini. It's called A Brief Vacation. And this film is simply not available now. But it's about a woman in Milan who has a factory job and is diagnosed with TB and sent off from this ghastly life that she lives in kind of a really dank Milan into the Alps. And at the is it a sanitarium or a sanatorium? Sanatorium? Thank you. She's treated nicely, right? She's fed well. She has a room of her own with a lovely view of the mountains. Back home in Milan, you know, she has, you know, an extended family that live with her, and they're saying things like, "You're not that sick. Why don't you work for a while until you get worse?" Anyway, so I mean, it's utter heaven. And then one day, at the end of the film, the doctor comes in and says, "You can go home now." What, you know? So what good has it done her? Yeah.
I'd like to ask, excuse me, about the special effects, and if you could talk a little bit about the special effects.
There are none.
Oh, yes, there are.
Which are you talking about?
Well, I think I loved how the fairies just appeared.
Oh, yeah. That was, by the way, that was by that time a fairly established technique. It's called stop action photography, right? You shoot the kid, and then you stop the camera, you bring in the fairies, and you turn on the camera again. And it was figured out by Georges Méliès before the turn of the century. Georges Méliès is the subject of Martin Scorsese's film Hugo. And he made that spectacular film, A Trip to the Moon. And then there are a couple of dissolves in the film, which are, again, established technique.
Left the picnic, and we saw over to the side, we saw the shadow of, and we saw that image of the grandmother as he's thinking about that.
Oh, yeah, a superimposition. Yeah.
Something I found interesting is that the Fresh Air Fund, the charity, was obviously had some religious base, and when they went to the picnic, they had a minister or whatever with them. They said a prayer, and the music reflected the prayer. But then suddenly, when she was reading the book, that was a fairy tale, and it seemed to tap into the sort of mystical movements that were on the rise then, and that was a fairy tale that's sort of pre-Christian or not Christian, you know, the princess and the witch and the fairies, and it's like it's totally shifted from this uplifting Christian message or standard religious message, go out and save these children, to this fantasy land. And I don't think it was suicide. I thought the little boy was still in a literal stage of thinking where I'm going to get in the boat and then I'll be rescued. But it did remind me of Gatsby's backstory. See, it could just lead into that.
I don't, you know, I think, actually, we'll do it. I wonder if we now are more alert to, say, the simultaneous presentation of a specific religion and magic. If we're more alert to that now than people were in 1912. And I don't know that I can even speak to it, but it's possible. It's also, you know, look, it's not that careful a film. You know, I mean, I think one way to talk about this film is that this filmmaker really lucked out. You know, that somebody came up with an idea for a fabulous ending. And, you know, and the rest was just sort of getting it done. It's, you know, I mean, it's sort of nicely economical narratively, but it's not it's not particularly subtle in any way. You know, there were films in 1912 that are more subtly put together narratively. D.W. Griffith had done a lot by then. But, again, that I think the ending is so beautiful and ambiguous that we really do pour ourselves into the film. And the film deserves it, but maybe not by intention. But there's no way to know. Simply no way to know. What we have is what we have, and it seems lovely, and it brings up all sorts of things. Questions about social welfare agencies, questions about religion, questions about magic, questions about endings, and on and on. And in a way, the effect of beauty.
And Howie, can I ask you on the social welfare part of it, for my own edification, how were children chosen?
I have no idea. According to this,
because he looked very different, it seemed, in terms of his attire than the rest of the group.
Yeah. According to the film, people, volunteers with the Fresh Air Fund were given cards, and they could give them out to kids, and whatever kids wanted to would come. I have no idea how it worked. I don't know how it works now either. Yeah.
Just an observation that I thought it was very interesting the way they chose to portray poverty, and the choice of having a grandmother that was drinking, appeared to be alcohol, and how they portrayed the room as very slovenly. Mm-hmm. A shelf on the wall was not even horizontal, it was askew. So it makes me wonder if those were the typical stereotypes of poverty at the time. And then also the boy was the only boy with holes in his shoes, was the only boy filmed that had holes in his shorts. And they portrayed him with his shirt half tucked in, half tucked out. And that they did not need to do that. He could have been poor and had his shirt tucked in.
I think that you're right, that this is a common picture. Certainly thinking from 1912 back, films that depict people who are poor tend to include those cliches. The inability to dress decently, as in tuck in your shirt, torn clothing, and rooms that are ragged from top to bottom. And I think that was quite common. I just thought of this, when did Jacob Riis's How the Other Half Lives come out? Anybody know? Yeah, probably everybody in the room. Yes.
Yeah, he struck me as kind of a true idealist, almost like a Don Quixote moment where he gets the fire of art lit within him, and he has a vision, mm-hmm. and he's going to follow that vision. This idealized world is, maybe it's real, and he's going out there seeking that beauty, that vision, that, whether it's real or not, if he can hold on to it, And
while he's listening to the story, of course, we see what Bruce Kaywin calls a mind screen, which is what he's thinking. And what he's thinking is, or what he's seeing in his mind's eye, is home with grandma.
We wonder about the clash with reality that inevitably will come.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay. So those images are well known by 1912. And and Jacob Riis's images are grim. Yes.
So I didn't see a person of color in this film.
Oh no.
Was that taboo at that time to film, or they didn't exist, or?
Yes, taboo, but I'm not sure it even rose to that level. I think it would just, it wouldn't have occurred to people unless they were making some kind of race joke. Or wanted to show a servant, then possibly. But just in showing, people in the world, no. Yeah.
When I was a kid, a teenager, we had a Fresh Air girl from the Bronx come up to stay with our family in central New York for, I think she came 3 or 4 summers in a row. We had the same girl
it was a brand new world for her.
Yeah.
To come to rural New York State, it was another country, another culture, and it was the best thing ever for us too. It was really good.
Yeah.
Just, you mentioned that he might have gotten lucky, the filmmaker.
Yeah.
And it struck, which caused me to think, he used, this is not all original music, right? These were...
No, there was no original music at the time. This was put on roughly in 2006, I think.
The music was put on?
Yeah.
Oh, so there was no music. Because I was wondering if
there was no music
maybe the reason he had
film.
the original lingering shot was to allow the music to complete.
Yeah, no. But by 1912, I don't think any films had a score written for them. It was almost all improvisation. Within a few years, say with, starting in roughly 1915, some films had a score written for them. But that score might have been played by an orchestra in New York or Chicago. But by the time it got to Julesburg, there was somebody who had some kind of musical instrument playing for the film, and they would not have seen the film before. But this is a wonderful set put out by the National Film Preservation Foundation, and music very carefully chosen, and lots of work done to restore the films and so on. Yeah.
Technical question: would the sort of soft image overlaying of his grandmother that he pictures, would that have counted as a special effect of the time?
Yeah,
was that technically sophisticated?
The dissolve, which also means the superimposition, was figured out before the year 1900.
I think the idea that you could take a child out who's living in poverty out into the mountains or outdoors, and it would change him, put him on a good path.
For the better?
Yeah, we still ascribe to that because we do have programs in the Denver area that take children from an inner city out into the mountains. Quite a few. We still believe that. Do you know where that comes from?
Something just popped in my head to say Thoreau, but I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure that's true at all.
But there's a lot of biblical references, go up to the mountain, receive wisdom, things like that.
Which I think is somewhat different because, it's all rural then, pretty much. It's a long-held belief, but I bet it's mid-19th century in this country that we think that taking someone from the corrupt city into the good countryside will heal them in some way.
Yeah,
before that, certainly before 1800, in this country and probably Western Europe also, there was a real fear of wilderness. Wilderness was the places that God had not sanctified. Wilderness was unruly and dangerous, and it was, Satan's people are out there. That's what Hawthorne wrote about, for instance. But beginning in roughly 1800, in the Western world, there was a shift in consciousness to begin to accept in a certain way, the healthfulness and the beauty of wilderness. Before roughly 1800, mountains were considered to be warts, on the wonderful fabric of the earth. And, but there were a lot of changes which had to do with certain discoveries in physics and so on. Roughly 1800, the attitude towards the outdoors started to change. But that's all. That's sort of beyond what I know already. Yes, yeah. Yeah. Yes, the Romantic poets, scared everybody because they said, "Oh, let's go to Mont Blanc," And everybody, the rest of the Western world is thinking, you don't go up there. There are, creatures there.
I guess I also wonder how much it is a matter of the health benefits of being away from the overcrowded cities with the disease that's present in those cities and the less crowding of the countryside and therefore also less disease in the countryside. I don't know how much that might have influenced.
That's one reason that Denver exists, for TB patients from eastern cities. What they I don't know if that shopping center even still exists. JCRS, Jewish Consumptive Relief Society. There was a TB sanatorium out there.
This discussion makes me think of the Outward Bound movement, which incidentally was brought to North America from England by a Coloradan, Charles Frolicker, who was at that time headmaster at Colorado Academy. And in the beginning, they focused on deprived inner city children. And it's not only the exposure to the beauties of nature, but the challenge for these children of accomplishing something that they really believe they can't do, like rappelling off a cliff, or and the mental health benefits of that were quite remarkable and quite successful.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out, I was just looking at the Fresh Air Fund website, and I was looking at their history, and they go ahead and say that at that time that they began, New York City was overflowing with children living in crowded tenements, and many of these children were hit by tuberculosis. So it was a direct cause of the tuberculosis epidemic at the time.
And all those immigrants. Yeah. All those immigrants crowding into the Lower East Side and into the Bronx. Well, we don't have time to look at it again. Sorry.
And for a few more comments and questions, though, if anybody has anything else to add.
It still has a lot of life in it still, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. One of the things, again, and I know this has been said, but I have to repeat it because I'm trying to sit with it myself, is this notion of, both relief from poverty by giving this child this gift, but also there's a kind of a cruelty in giving this gift. The fact that they've taken him away for just this moment, they've given him this sort of fantasy story about escaping it entirely, and we're kind of left with, wow, that was a drag. That was really sad. You started off to do well and good for this kid, and you just made things worse.
Well, and following that line, what does it make him do? It makes him get in a boat that doesn't have any oars and just go drifting off. And how's he going to get out of that jam?
I think it's been alluded to, but I just keep thinking about sort of the ambiguity of happily ever after in its many forms, not to get political, but Proposition 106 passed, and it's sort of like that idea of happily ever after is very different than, say, someone else's idea. And so perhaps that was his happily ever after. And
well, yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to share that the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, the main hall at one time was a sanatorium. And along the hillside, there were huts where people stayed. And General Palmer, who founded Colorado Springs, encouraged a lot of his friends from the East Coast and Europe to move there. and it became known as a place for treatment of tuberculosis. And a lot of the homes in the old North End were built with large porches or screened-in porches, so patients could rest and breathe fresh air.
Howie, thank you as always.
Thank you all.
You always bring us something wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll see you again on